search on.
I do not have safe search on, trust me.
Oh, God.
You saw the search results I got earlier for
time. Cock-arena of time. I like it.
Urban Dictionary has a very interesting result for that word. But anyway.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Do tell.
No.
Okay. So anyone who's curious can look up Urban Dictionary wind wanker.
Yes.
But like, I mean, a lot of it's I think games that they're just, as they've gotten bigger, like the soundtracks have gotten bigger. So like the Call of Duty, even though Call of Duty doesn't have a definitive, like Battlefield I think has, where it's like the same kind of like theme, but like Call of Duty, the soundtracks are normally fucking excellent as well. They're very kind of like cinematic in scope and kind of like more often than not kind of heavy, where they feel kind of like expensive. But Red Dead Redemption Part 2, that soundtrack is fucking really, really, really good as well. Like, I know we're not getting into kind of like two, because it is one of the problems with something like this is like, how do you describe it all? Because it's cinematic, I think it's the only way that you really can with it. But like, there's plenty of kind of fucking spaghetti western kind of twangy guitars and stuff in there, but as well kind of like atmospheric nature and the stuff. Obviously not any black metal in it. Oh, you're feeding kind of like people's alligators. So do you guys have any other suggestions for soundtracks?
No, I can't think of any other ones now. Like, you kind of exhausted my list anyway.
You're too busy looking up wind wankers.
Pretty much, yeah. They're just so compelling.
But yes, I suppose back on the cover soundtrack, like there's many more soundtracks out there. And we might get into one or two in depth at some stage. But on to the next one.
Great Odin's Raven!
So I suppose after all that, for anyone that's still after hanging around and might be interested, I've recently, well not recently, a couple of months back I suppose, started getting into playing electronic music. I played the guitar for 25 years now.
Badly.
I suppose, yeah. But I've always kind of liked sort of electronic music, but I've never actually played it because I always thought that it was kind of like a bit beyond my control or a bit beyond my kind of capability. So a while ago I got back into it and I've been kind of like practice and learn things. So I decided to kind of share, I suppose, my experience if you want to purchase stuff. Yeah. And as well for people that want to maybe start making 8-bit music or kind of like, video game music. What are the best options? Because it's a thing, I kind of went into it blind, and I
fumbled around a bit before.
Bought a lot of gear that I didn't really necessarily need and ended up selling on, trying to get stuff. But I suppose for anyone, if you want to do it on the cheap, first thing that you can do is if you have a computer, you can get a couple of different the programs. I'm trying to think of the best way. They're called DAWs, which are basically workstations for music. I think like you can use GarageBand or Audacity, which are free anyway, but the only thing, they wouldn't necessarily be DAWs, that you could use those for editing stuff. Your audio tracks, if you record into your computer but that's a different thing altogether. That fucking won't even get into that. You need a digital interface and everything. But the Ableton Live, I think, is free at the moment. Reaper is one that people go on about an awful lot. Pro Tools on Apple products, but there's a load of them out there. There's some free, very, very good free ones, and they all basically do the same. Basically what it means is you can record into them, but you can also program music into them. So you can get kind of like say plugins, they're called. So you can have a keyboard plugin which will emulate the sound of another keyboard, and there's loads of free ones. Or you can get like guitar plugins, and basically what you do then is you can use patterns to put it in, which will sequence your sounds. And you'll see, if you look up kind of like music producers on YouTube, you see a lot of people, this is the way that they go. But for me, I didn't really have any interest in that. And I'd imagine a lot of people that if you want to go a little bit further than that, for making 8-bit music. Well, I suppose first I'll just tell you some of the kind of like the VSTs that you can use that are kind of like cheap enough for free.
Maybe explain what a VST is. You're just using all this jargon.
A VST, it's kind of like, it's a plug-in keyboard that you can use on it's a virtual keyboard. It's a virtual instrument that you can put into one of your DAWs and you can get the sound of it. There's YMCK. They're a Japanese band that a lot of people. I didn't mention them when we were talking about the Chiptunes because I didn't particularly like them, but a lot of people really, really like, and they're identified as being one of the bigger chiptune bands. But they have an emulator thing that you can put in called Magical 8-bit plug, which is supposed to be very good and it'll give you that sound as well. Then there's a program called Native Instruments, which is like one of the bigger DAWs, but it's fairly expensive and you have to pay for all the different instruments in it. A lot of people that kind of go off and want to have real sounds and stuff use that. So say people that want to have a metal band, but they don't have they play their guitar, they seem to use Native Instruments for their drums. But it's called Byte Riot. Is the one that you can get for that. And then Korg have one as well. It's a little gadget called a Kamata that you can put on your iPhone or your iPad. And then there's one got Plug, which is another VST, which is called Chip Sounds. But being honest, they're all kind of like cost a bit. But you can get ones, if you look up for the virtual, or what was it called? Little Small DJ for the Game Boy, which we mentioned earlier on, which is a program that people use. There's other programs that are similar to that are free that you can put on your computer, and you can even put that on your computer if you emulate your Game Boy, so you can try it out first and see if that's the way to go. But really, you don't have to go and if you want to do kind of like say using actual gear, all those bits and pieces, they're all based on the first synths and very, very basic synths. So kind of like you can pick up a cheap old synthesizer, Casio one, and just use the things for the square wave and the triangle wave, and you can get your lead sounds out of it that way. But if you're going to go off and buy synths at the moment, I suppose one of the better ones to get the Korg Minilog or the Monolog. I can never remember what it's the cheaper of the two. It's a small little one. It shows the waveform on it, so it'll teach you a little bit about kind of like the different sounds when you're kind of like programming in. So you can just put that down to the basic thing, and you can sequence it as well in it. What I got was the Micro Freak, which is by a place called Arturia. That's got loads of inbuilt sounds in it as well already, and you can you can manipulate that to the highest degree, but you can get a really, really, really good synth kind of sound out of it. But then there's, if you want to go up a little bit more in price, there's what was it called? I'll have to look it up now. But there's different crowds that specialize in making actual kind of like 8-bit kind of like those synths. There's a crowd called Critter and Guitari, which make the organelle, which is what's the word? It's open for people to develop sounds for it, which is, I suppose, a bit more high end if you want to get into it. Twisted Electrons do a thing called the AY3 Mark II chiptune 8-bit synthesizer, which is also a sequencer, and that looks, out of the whole lot of them, probably the best. And if you're on a budget, and I think it's around $30 or $40 or pounds, you can Teenage Engineering or a crowd, they do these little things. They look like calculators. The PO20 is a pocket operator arcade, and it has all samples from arcade music in it, so you can program it in to have your beats in it and kind of like all that. And that'll be, I suppose, if you want to start getting into things, it'd be that way. But as well, then if you want to go down with the Game Boy, if you can get a Game Boy, you need to get a cartridge that's flashed, and then you have to be able to find that you can buy that little small DJ thing for I think it's $5 people were saying for, and then if you put it onto that little sound jet DJ. But as well, if you go off and try and buy it online, people charging like 70 or 80 quid for like the cartridge with it already on it. But there's alternatives as well if you look around for it. And that's if you have a Game Boy already. Then if you have a DS, I was looking into it, Korg released an actual cartridge where it's like a Korg synthesizer on it. Well, the DS10, I think, which some people use those as well, and it looks to be fairly powerful, and it recreates the sound of one of the Korg early synthesizers really, really well with it. But yeah, that'll be kind of like the basics to get into it. If you wanted to get further into it and you want to do like fake bit stuff, you're going to be expanding your gear. So basically, you're going to need a synth. Then depending on if you got a modular synth, which is a whole other fucking thing. then you're going to have something to sequence it. I'd recommend BeatStep Pro. You'll also need a keyboard. It's a MIDI keyboard to play it if you have a modular synth thing, but if you can get all together in one, then you might need a drum machine. If you have a drum machine and a synthesizer, you're better off having a sequencer to kind of like bring the two of them together, control the two of them at the same time. Then the more gear that you're going to get, you're going to need a mixer. And I'd get sound monitors as well. Don't go off getting kind of like different speakers, although I think it'll do really with it. But I went through all these different phases buying all those things, and if you really want to get into it in a big way, it's stuff like the MPC Live by the Akai, or what's the Teenage Engineering OP1, which is like the top of the range thing. So you can sample stuff, you can put stuff in there. There's like synths in it as well.
You're talking hundreds though at this stage.
Yeah,
aren't you?
the MPC Live, it'd be more, originally was associated with hip hop, but that's basically, if you don't want to use a computer, it's a computer away from a computer. It's got everything built into it. Which I prefer that for the tactile thing. But I ended up selling loads of the synth stuff, and I just use the MPC Live now and the Arturia Micro Freak. I'll probably pick up other small little bits, kind of like, you can get like Bastel do really, really unusual kind of pieces of gear if you want to get into drones, and they have a thing called the Castle, which is a really, really small thing that if you mess around with it, it sounds kind of like a tape loading with it. But kind of like, my recommendations for people starting out, if you don't want to go down the free road and kind of like use all the programs and all that stuff, whereas I think that kind of takes away from the kind of the not grittiness, but if you want to make something kind of like, that's authentic, and you don't want to use the Game Boy thing, because although a lot of them say that it's really, really easy and it looks a little bit fiddly to me, I prefer, but maybe that's because I'm coming from background of playing guitars and stuff and just want to have more hands on. And there's one piece of kit that I think it looks lovely, and I'd recommend from listening to it. It's called the 8-bit Power Synthesizer. It's made by this guy Michael Rucci over in the States. It looks like it's made by Nintendo. It looks kind of like a controller. If you Google it and listen to it, this guy makes all these things himself and sells it on, and I'm sure there's other people that do similar bits and pieces, but it looks like a guitar pedal with little buttons on it, and that to me sounds like one of the more authentic things. Whereas if you just wanted to do chip tunes but you didn't want to go down the whole route of using other something like that, I think it'd be very, very good. But it'd be, if you spend just a tiny little bit more, you get something like the Arturia kind of like entry level synthesizer, or the Korg Monologue, which is actually very good, and you'll still make the same stuff, and you can figure out how to kind of put it together along with that. But yeah, I hope that's been, I know it's been a little bit all over the place because I kind of just did it off the top of my head. I'm probably missing out on loads of bits and pieces, but if people are more interested in hearing about kind of like bits and how to go down or what to do, kind of like, drop us a message on Facebook and we get into it a little bit better.
Yeah, at least that's just a starting point of various things you can go and look up on Google. And
because it's not like a tutorial and stuff, but it is just for my money, because I ended up originally getting like various different drum machines, then not really liking the sounds of some of them. Some of them, they're very, very kind of like specific sounds. Like, say, what you'll always hear people talk about is a Roland 808, which is what was used by a lot of the early hip hop guys, and it has that very digital drum sound to it. I wasn't too keen on that. And then some of them, they're like, I think the Electron, it's the DigiCat. It's a sampler and a drum machine, but that's like 600 quid. And you're not going to spend 600 quid on just a drum machine. They're just basic, but you're going to end up buying a lot of different gear, and it sounds one way when you're looking at videos about it, and then you put it in and you go, well, that doesn't really suit the kind of music that I'm making. So that for me, it came down to, it was recommended at first. Someone told me just get the MPC Live at the start. It'll do everything that you wanted to do.
It is a big layout when you don't know, though.
When you don't know, but you end up buying all these different things like modular synths and different bits and pieces and putting them together, and then kind of going, oh, they don't really sound right together. And then if some of the like, I was into vintage gear. One bit of advice: just be really careful if you're buying vintage gear on eBay, some people, they say, oh, it's in perfect condition, but you're buying, say, maybe a drum machine that's from the 90s that's been around 30 years old.
Yeah.
It's not going to be perfect.